Good morning, first grade foxes. I hope you're having a good week. I love seeing you guys so much on Monday. It's so nice to see you in person and I'll have to talk to you through a screen. It was a really special day for me and it made probably my whole year. It was so exciting. Today, we're going to be reading and learning about somebody you may have heard about before. And the title of this read aloud is George Washington, Commander-in-Chief. I want you to listen for these words today as I'm reading. Daring, defeat, and struggled. Now I'm going to go to the next image, the first image of the read aloud. And what I want you all to do is I want you to think about the title. Remember, the title of this read aloud is George Washington, Commander-in-Chief. And I want you to think about what's happening in this picture. And I want you to make a prediction or guess about what this read aloud is going to be about and what's going to happen next in the sequence of events. And I want you to listen to find out whether or not your prediction about the next event in the creation of the United States as a nation is correct. So if you want to pause the video and write down your prediction or guess about what's going to be happening next in this sequence of events, and you can go ahead and write that down, and then at the end, you can see if you were correct or not. Okay, here we go. You will remember that while representatives to the Second Continental Congress met and signed the Declaration of Independence, George Washington was far away from Philadelphia. Do you remember what the Declaration of Independence is? He was sent north to Boston to fight the British. His was a very difficult job. Washington's army was made up mostly of farmers with no military experience at all. They had no uniforms and only old guns called muskets, which they hardly knew how to fire. There weren't enough guns and there was hardly any gunpowder. The wording of the Declaration of Independence was approved on July 4th, 1776. 5 days later, messengers carrying copies of the Declaration reached New York, where General Washington's army was camped. His army heard the words and rallied in support of independence. A statue of King George was melted down into bullets for the Continental Army. Now, how do you think the army felt when they heard the Declaration? The men soon realized that they would never have enough bullets for the fight ahead. Later that summer, British warships were spotted entering New York's harbor. King George had gotten help from the Germans as well. Now, Germans are people who are from Germany, another country on the continent of Europe. If you have time and you have a map or a globe, see if you can find and locate Germany. More than 30,000 trained troops arrived to fight the unprepared colonial militiamen. George Washington nearly lost his army in the fierce fighting around New York and New Jersey that fall. The Redcoats chased the Continental Army south, across the Delaware River. Thinking that they had scared them off, the Redcoats left only a small force to guard them on the other side of the river. It was December, and they felt sure that nobody would fight during the dead of winter. But they were wrong. What do you think the colonists did? George Washington came up with a daring plan. Daring means courageous. On Christmas night, he gathered his men together. It was snowing and cold, but Washington had the men get in their boats and row quietly across the ice-filled river. More than 2,000 soldiers crossed the river. The crossings took 9 hours. Marching through the wind and sleet of the December cold, the Continental Army reached the British troops just before dawn. While the Redcoats were sleeping, Washington's men launched a surprise attack on the enemy camp. The Redcoats were surprised, all right. Some of them came out of their bunks in their underwear and just held up their hands. It was a total victory for General Washington. Nobody in his army had been killed. Washington and his army returned to Philadelphia to shouts of joy. But the war wasn't over yet. The Continental Congress knew that they needed more help in order to win their war for independence. German soldiers were fighting alongside the British. Perhaps the French would send soldiers across the ocean to help the colonists fight against the British. It was no secret that the French and British had long been enemies. Now, the French people are from France, another country on the continent of Europe. So if you can look and see if you can locate that on a map or globe as well. The Continental Congress decided to send some men to France to ask for their support. Their chief representative was 70-year-old Benjamin Franklin. Do you remember who Benjamin Franklin is? The French did not like to lose in battle, and they were still angry about losing to the British in an earlier war. At first, they did not want to support the colonists. It was crazy to think that an army of farmers could defeat one of the greatest armies in the world, the British Army. Now, if you defeat someone, that means that you win. But an American victory in New York in the fall of 1777 changed their opinion overnight. They promised gunpowder, soldiers, and ships. General Washington's army was camped in Pennsylvania at a place called Valley Forge during the winter of 1777 and 1778. Snow lay on the ground when Washington and his men arrived. They pitched tents and built log cabins, but neither kept out the cold. The men were dressed in rags, and many of them had no shoes, walking barefoot in the snow. There was hardly any food, and some days the men had little to eat and drink other than bread and water. Disease spread through the camp, and many men died. The men missed their families and wanted to go home. Washington struggled to keep up his men's spirits. So that means that Washington worked very hard to keep his men from quitting. He camped in a tent beside them for a time, earning their respect. No battles were fought at Valley Forge that winter, but the cold and hungry men spent hours training to be ready when they met the British again in the spring. So here's a video that you can watch on BrainPop Jr. that's all about George Washington. So when you go to BrainPop Jr., click on Social Studies and then American History, and then you can select the video on George Washington. And if you want to, you can take the quiz afterward. Now, here are your questions for today. Remember at the beginning, I told you to make a prediction of what you thought this read aloud was going to be about and what would happen next. So my first question is, was your prediction about what happened next in the formation of the United States as a new nation correct? Why or why not? Question 2. How would you describe George Washington as Commander-in-Chief? Number 3. How would you describe George Washington's army? Number 4. Why were George Washington and his army willing to fight the Redcoats? And number 6. How did the Declaration of Independence make George Washington's soldiers feel, and what did they do after they heard it? Now today, with our word work, our word of the day today is struggled. So in the read aloud, you heard, Washington struggled to keep up his men's spirits. Say the word struggled with me. Struggled. Struggled means had difficulty and worked very hard to accomplish something. So an example would be, I struggled to get up the steps with the heavy box. Now I want you to think, have you ever struggled with a task? And I want you to hold on to that thought because that's going to be one of your options for writing tomorrow. So keep that thought in your head about something maybe that you've struggled with before. Now, I'm going to ask a question, and I want you to answer it in a full sentence and use the word struggled with your answer. So, have you ever struggled to get out of bed in the morning? Have you ever struggled with cleaning your room? Have you ever struggled to find something? Have you ever struggled to wait your turn? So for tomorrow, Thursday, May the 7th, here are your two options for writing. The first one, option one, I told you just a minute ago to think about something that you've struggled with before. So I want you in your plan to draw what it was that you had a struggle with. What did you struggle with? Now, I don't know if you recognize this word. I hope you do, but that's our first grade word, perseverance. And remember, perseverance means to not give up, to keep on trying until you accomplish whatever it is that you're trying to get done. So I want you to think about in your plan, drawing what it was that you struggled with. And then on this side, how did you persevere? How did you use perseverance to overcome that struggle? So draw over here what you had to do to persevere, to overcome what it was that you were struggling with. And then down below, I want you to write about what it was that you were struggling with and the different things that you did to persevere and to overcome that struggle to where it wasn't a struggle for you anymore. So remember to use complete sentences. Start your letters with, or your sentences with the capital letter and end with the correct punctuation. And then your second option, this is your option 2, and this comes from the packet. Now I've divided your plan into fourths, so 4 equal parts. And in each part, I want you to draw a trait that made George Washington a good leader for the Continental Army. So think of 4 different reasons why he was a good leader for the Continental Army. So your writing prompt is, what traits made George Washington a good leader for the Continental Army? So I want you to write about these 4 traits that you draw in your plan and tell down here at the bottom why those traits made George Washington a good leader for the Continental Army. I hope that you guys are having a great week, and I'm excited to see you on our Zoom call on Thursday. I will send information about that on Wednesday afternoon, and we've got something fun planned for that. And then, of course, I will have a video with culminating activities for you guys to do this weekend with your family. I will post that on Friday. I'll talk to you guys soon. Love you and miss you. Bye.